Hypatia, a flame against the wind. Episode 1. The streets of Alexandria always seemed alive with voices. Merchants advertised their wares beneath the searing Egyptian sun, while philosophers debated politics and the nature of the cosmos in the shade of tall colonnades. The salty breeze from the great harbor carried scents of fish and spices, swirling them into the crowded main thoroughfares. It was a city of collisions and fusions, Egyptian tradition meeting Hellenic culture, Roman authority confronting local customs, Christian fervor rubbing against pagan rites. In the midst of these collisions, knowledge flourished. Writings on medicine, geometry, astronomy, philosophy. Scrolls could be found in private libraries, in corners of the Serapeum, and in quiet studies, nourishing generations of thinkers who were drawn to the city's luminous intellectual light. Amid this bustling cityscape, in a modest house not far from the grand complex once associated with the Museum and Library of Alexandria, a young girl named Hypatia grew under the tutelage of her father, Theon. He was a notable mathematician and astronomer, a man whose world revolved around the patterns of stars, the geometry of circles, and the logical structure of the cosmos. Morning after morning, Theon and Hypatia would sit in a small courtyard, sunlight creeping over the worn stone walls, and spread open papyrus scrolls that contained texts by Euclid and Ptolemy. Geometry, Theon insisted, was the language of precision, the manner by which nature's chaos could be turned into comprehensible patterns. On one such morning, Theon placed a fresh sheet of papyrus in front of Hypatia. She was about 13, thin, slight, with alert eyes that seemed too wise for her young face. He spoke with measured warmth. "Draw me a circle. Take your time. Let it be as perfect as your hand can trace." She obeyed. Dipping her stylus into ink, she sketched a circle that was fairly symmetrical. Theon leaned over to inspect it and nodded. "A circle is the essence of perfection, my child. Now, measure it. We'll find its circumference, and from there we'll derive its properties." Hypatia placed a crude compass at the center and began measuring in small increments. This exercise, though simple to Theon, enthralled her. She felt as though by passing out the circle's properties, she was peering into the mind of the cosmos. When they finished, Theon set aside the papyrus. "Remember, Hypatia, each new generation must learn from those who came before. It's how knowledge survives. But we must go further. Never fear questioning, never fear re-examining old truths. My father told me the same, and now I pass it on to you." She nodded. "Yes, father. I will remember." Decades earlier, part of Alexandria's great library had fallen to ruin, ravaged first by Julius Caesar's campaign and then by successive waves of neglect and political hostility. Nonetheless, a portion of its holdings, or at least copies of them, survived in smaller halls, private collections, and the Serapeum, a religious and learning complex devoted to the Greco-Egyptian deity Serapis. Over the centuries, the Serapeum had grown not just into a sanctuary of worship, but also a repository of scholarship, containing lecture rooms and a notable store of scrolls. Even if it could not compare to the grandeur of the old library in its prime, it remained a beacon for those seeking texts of philosophy, mathematics, and the sciences. Since Hypatia was a girl, Theon had taken her through the Serapeum's towering halls, where statues and columns soared upward, trying to mimic the infinity of the sky. While some visitors marveled at the religious icons, Hypatia was more intrigued by the discreet repositories of books, the small chambers where scholars pored over scripts by Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, and Archimedes. One afternoon, as the midday sun filtered through the high windows, she approached a dusty alcove where a single elderly man had dozed off over an open scroll. She quietly picked up another scroll, scanning the title, Ptolemy's Almagest. She began to read. Though the volume was complex, she recognized references to the geometry of orbits and the motion of celestial bodies. She lost track of time, enthralled by the notion that these patterns in the heavens followed laws that the human mind could unravel. It was then that she sensed a presence behind her. Turning around, she saw a tall figure with a warm smile. "You take an interest in the spheres, child?" The man's voice was gentle, yet resonant. Hypatia cleared her throat. "Yes, sir. The geometry of the cosmos is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It is like uncovering secrets that the gods wrote into the sky." He smiled. "A poetic answer. You must be Theon's daughter. Word of your curiosity precedes you." "I am Hypatia. My father is teaching me." "Indeed he is," the man said. "I am Olympius, a teacher of philosophy at the Serapeum. I've heard rumors that you are gifted in geometry and that you question everything." Hypatia blushed slightly. She remembered her father's encouragement. Never fear re-examining old truths. She was surprised to learn that her modest inquiries had attracted attention. "If you wish," Olympius continued, "you may join my student gatherings. We discuss mathematics, philosophy, and the works of Plotinus and Plato in the courtyard just outside. I see you have a thirst for it." Hypatia was about to respond, but footsteps echoed behind them. Her father, Theon, approached with a measured stride. He was carrying a couple of scrolls pressed close to his chest. "Olympius," Theon said, dipping his head in greeting. "I see you've met my daughter." Olympius nodded. "She's a rare talent. I was just inviting her to observe some of our discussions." Theon smiled gently at Hypatia. "What do you think?" Hypatia held the scroll a bit tighter. She could feel her heart flutter with the prospect of joining the circle of older students. "I would love to, father." "That settles it," Theon said. "But mind you, Hypatia, you must also learn discipline. Knowledge is not just gleaned from observation, it is tempered by effort, reflection, and conversation with many minds." She nodded eagerly, her eyes shining. "Yes, father. I promise." Over the following months, Hypatia attended Olympius's philosophical gatherings, typically held in a small marble courtyard adjacent to the Serapeum. The courtyard was ringed by tall Corinthian columns, and in its center sat a statue of Hermes, symbolic guide of knowledge and transitions. Students, some novices, some more advanced, would lounge on benches or on the polished ground, discussing the philosophical treatises of Plato or the cosmic revelations of the astronomers. It was in those discussions that Hypatia first encountered the fervent interplay of ideas that would shape her future. Though still in her teens, she was invited to speak and question the older students, who quickly discovered her agile mind. One day, they debated the nature of reality as posited by Plotinus. "Plotinus tells us that the one is beyond being," said one older student, brushing dust from his tunic. "It is, in essence, the source of all existence, but not existence itself." A second student disputed him. "Is that not contradictory? Can something that is the source of existence fail to exist in a definable way?" Hypatia, leaning against a column, interjected carefully, "Perhaps the contradiction arises only in our language, not in the concept. Plotinus suggests the one transcends categories. To speak of it in normal terms is to limit it. In geometry, we often speak of a point that has no dimension, yet it is central to lines and planes. Could the one be akin to a point that exists outside our typical spatial constructs?" The students paused, some in surprise. One of them, a curly-haired young man, gave a thoughtful nod. "That is an intriguing analogy, Hypatia. A point exists in concept, but has no size. So the one in concept might exist, but have no being in the sense we normally define." Olympius, who had been watching quietly, offered a gentle smile. "Yes, precisely so. You see, to explain the intangible, we often resort to what we know. Hypatia's analogy of geometry is apt. We describe something that has no dimension, yet it is real in our abstract understanding. So too with the one for Plotinus." Those dialogues were exhilarating for Hypatia. She found that philosophy and mathematics, though seemingly different, worked in tandem to reveal the structure of the universe. Philosophy dared to ask what the ultimate nature of reality was, while geometry provided a means of describing that reality in precise terms, both striving toward truth. Meanwhile, the social climate in Alexandria was anything but calm. Religious tensions simmered beneath everyday commerce and scholarship. Christianity had been gaining ground, supported by Roman emperors who found the new faith a unifying force in the empire's increasingly diverse regions. The older pagan traditions, long the backbone of Alexandrian intellectualism, found themselves challenged. Laws had been passed curtailing pagan worship, and certain Christian bishops, newly empowered, looked upon the Serapeum and its pagan associations with suspicion. At home, Hypatia sometimes heard Theon speak in hushed tones about how the world was changing and how the old temples might not endure. "My dear daughter," he said one evening as they dined on bread and olive oil, "learning is never inherently pagan or Christian. However, many associate what we do, reading Plato, learning about the cosmos, praising the rational mind, with the traditions that preceded Christianity's rise. And so, there's a risk that the knowledge we treasure could be lost in the political or religious storms." Hypatia listened quietly. She noticed a shadow of worry in her father's eyes. She was old enough to sense that a shift in power could mean a shift in how knowledge was valued and preserved. "Father," she asked, "can't we share knowledge in a way that all can accept, regardless of which gods they worship?" He sighed, swirling a bit of wine in his cup. "We can try. Some Christians value knowledge deeply. Look at men like Didymus the Blind or Origen in the past. They sought to merge Greek learning with Christian doctrine. It is not always a clash, but men who fear the old ways see scholars as potential threats. They worry that the rational mind might challenge faith." Hypatia leaned forward. "But reason and faith need not be at odds." "That is what I believe too," Theon said. "Perhaps that is what you will teach the world in time." Even as tensions brewed, Hypatia's reputation grew steadily. A tall figure by the age of 16, with an upright posture and an expressive face, she was already assisting Theon in his commentaries. Theon was preparing a new commentary on Ptolemy's mathematical works, and Hypatia's precise calculations and clarifications became integral to his efforts. She had begun to see not just the geometric, but also the philosophical underpinnings of astronomy. To measure the heavens was to measure humankind's place in the grand design. Some days, she and her father spent hours recalculating orbits, verifying data with star sightings at dawn or dusk. They used an astrolabe, a sophisticated device with circles and pointers, to track the movement of stars and planets. Although Ptolemy's geocentric model was the accepted standard, Hypatia found beauty in the mathematics that explained the apparent backward motion of planets, the famous epicycles. But she also found herself questioning it. One clear evening, they stood on the rooftop of their home, a vantage that overlooked much of the city, with the faint glow of lanterns flickering in the distance. Stars dotted the sky above them. Theon pointed to a bright object near the horizon. "That is Venus. Ptolemy's model says it moves in an epicycle around a deferent, with Earth at the center." Hypatia adjusted the astrolabe, aligning its pointers to Venus and a fixed star in the background. She marked the position. "Father," she said after a few moments of thought, "do you think it might be simpler if the sun were at the center, as some have speculated, or at least if Earth were not so immovable?" Theon paused, considering. A few older philosophers and astronomers, Aristarchus for one, did propose something like a heliocentric system, but the mathematics of Ptolemy's geocentric model fit the observations well enough as far as we can measure, and tradition is powerful. "But one day," she ventured, "we might measure them more precisely. The epicycles sometimes feel cumbersome. If the true arrangement were different, we would only know by looking deeper and not clinging too fast to tradition." Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "You show the spirit of inquiry. That is admirable. Perhaps you will be the one to refine these models." Hypatia's heart swelled with pride. She peered at the sky a little longer, feeling a sense of wonder that was equal parts mathematics and awe. By the time she reached her late teens, Hypatia's life included not just study, but also a growing understanding of the city's political and religious climate. Emissaries arrived from the imperial court, official edicts were posted in the public squares, and occasional riots flared between Christian and pagan factions. Even some Jews, a community with ancient roots in Alexandria, found themselves in precarious positions as Christian bishops tried to consolidate power. One day, she decided to walk through the busy marketplace near the great harbour to purchase a stylus. She wore a modest chiton and carried a simple leather pouch with coins. Vendors called out for her attention: spices from the east, woven baskets from the countryside, fresh fish from the harbour. She was weaving her way through the crowd when she noticed a commotion at the far edge of the square. A small group of Christian zealots, carrying wooden crosses, were tearing down an image of the old god Hermes that stood atop a pedestal. Shards of stone chipped away. Some onlookers shouted in protest, many of them older pagans. A few Christians stood back, uneasy with the destruction. As the statue was toppled, a hush fell. Hypatia felt her stomach twist. She had grown fond of the statue of Hermes in the Serapeum courtyard. It symbolized knowledge and the bridging of worlds. Seeing another likeness of the same god vandalized left her unsettled. She made her way around the disturbance, trying not to draw attention, and hurried home, stylus forgotten. That evening, she recounted to Theon what she had witnessed. He sighed deeply. The city churns with turmoil. The bishop, Theophilus, is increasingly bold. He seeks to cast out what he sees as idolatry. But do they not understand that knowledge is not the property of idols? Hypatia asked, a tremor in her voice. These images, Hermes, Serapis, once symbolized the pursuit of the divine, of wisdom and cosmic order. Theon squeezed her hand gently. They see them as relics of a world they want to leave behind. Perhaps they fear that if the old symbols remain, their new faith will be compromised. In time, perhaps the city will find peace. I hope we never lose the texts themselves. For that, we must remain vigilant. Hypatia nodded, her mind whirling with a mix of sadness and determination. She returned to her room, lit a small oil lamp, and opened a scroll on geometry. In the soothing clarity of lines and angles, she found a refuge from the chaos outside. Even so, an unspoken question haunted her. Would the unravelling of old gods also mean the unravelling of the knowledge preserved under their patronage? At 19, Hypatia's presence in philosophical circles was undeniable. She spoke with clarity on mathematics, ethics, and the metaphysics of Plotinus. Whenever she opened her mouth, even older scholars found themselves listening intently. Theon beamed with pride, but beneath his pride lay a father's protective worry. The city was not the stable seat of learning it once was. On a crisp morning, Theon came to her. "Daughter," he said, "I've received a request from a group of young scholars who wish for you to lead some sessions on geometry and astronomy at the Serapeum. They say I've taught them enough from my commentaries, but your insights fascinate them even more." Hypatia's eyebrows rose in surprise. "They want me to teach? They are advanced students, father. They might be older than me by years." He gave a little laugh. "Age is not the determinant of wisdom. I told them you would be honored." A flutter of excitement ran through her. She inhaled, "Yes, of course. I will do my best." Her first lesson took place a few days later in a small chamber within the Serapeum. The walls were lined with shelves holding scrolls, and a single wooden table stood near the center. About a dozen students, some near her age, some older, including a handful in their 30s, sat or stood around the table, ready to listen. She began simply. "We often treat mathematics and philosophy separately, but I propose they are two aspects of the same pursuit, understanding the patterns and principles that underlie reality." A student with a trim beard raised his hand. "Can you show us how geometry informs our philosophical inquiries?" Hypatia unrolled a chart of planetary spheres. "Consider Ptolemy's system. Even if we accept a geocentric cosmos, The geometry that describes planetary orbits is still built on theoretical constructs: circles, epicycles, deferents. These shapes correspond to forms or intelligible realities that we can only approach through reason. She tapped the chart lightly. This is where mathematics bridges the gap between what we see, the planet's wandering path across the sky, and the unseen reality, the laws that shape that path. In the same manner, philosophers attempt to see past the sensory world into the realm of pure forms or pure being. A murmur of agreement ran through the group. Another student chimed in. So mathematics trains our minds to conceptualize beyond the physical in preparation for philosophical truths. Hypatia nodded, a small smile forming. Precisely. There is a reason Plato had, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here," inscribed on the door of his academy, at least in legend. Geometry is training for the mind to see order in apparent chaos. That day's lessons stretched on, delving into conic sections, the concept of infinity, and the philosophical implications of proving something intangible by purely mental means. By the end of it, Hypatia felt a strange glow in her heart. Teaching, for her, was not just imparting information. It was igniting in others the same awe she felt for the universe. When the students dispersed, an older man wearing robes of a modest cut approached her quietly. He introduced himself as Hiladius, a teacher of rhetoric. "You handle yourself well," he commented. "I expected some hesitancy, given how young you are, but you teach with clarity and poise." "Thank you," Hypatia said softly, feeling both gratified and a bit embarrassed by the praise. He glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "Be mindful, though. Some of the zealots in our midst do not appreciate voices that speak glowingly of the old philosophical traditions. They see it as pagan knowledge." She frowned. "I teach reason and geometry, not worship of the old gods?" Hiladius gave a rueful chuckle. "Yes, but in times of turmoil, reason can be threatening to those who prefer dogma. Be careful, child. This city is not as it was." He left, leaving her with an uneasy feeling. Still, she resolved to persevere. She believed that truth, in any form, should not be silenced. At home, later that same week, Theon found her poring over a commentary on Apollonius's conics. He cleared his throat and sank onto the bench beside her. He looked exhausted. "Father, is everything all right?" she asked, studying his lined face. "There is talk," Theon said quietly, rubbing his brow with his fingers, "that Theophilus, our bishop, grows more aggressive in ridding Alexandria of pagan influences. Some say he has his eye on the Serapeum." Hypatia's eyes widened. "But the Serapeum is a haven for knowledge, not just a temple. It holds valuable texts." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know. But to the bishop, the statue of Serapis and the worship that occurs there is an affront to the Christian God. The library portion is secondary in his view. There are rumors that Emperor Theodosius might give him permission to demolish the pagan temples." She felt a wave of dismay course through her. "How can we preserve what's there?" Theon's face hardened with determination. "We copy what we can. We secure duplicates in private homes. If the day comes that the Serapeum is lost, we will not lose the knowledge." Immediately, Hypatia's mind raced with solutions. "We should gather others, like Olympius, who can help. We can distribute the scrolls to those sympathetic to learning, even some Christians who understand its importance. We must act quietly, carefully." "Yes," Theon said, nodding approvingly. "That is the best plan." And so began a covert effort. Over the next few months, while official debates raged about the future of pagan temples, Hypatia and a small cadre of scholars meticulously catalogued works in mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, medicine, and more. They made copies, sometimes working late into the night in private homes, whispering, taking care not to attract hostile attention. Olympius, determined to protect the intellectual heritage, facilitated access to locked sections of the Serapeum's library. He confided to Hypatia one evening as they sorted scrolls, "I've lived too long to believe that might won't have its way eventually, but if we can hide these treasures in plain sight or in safe places, knowledge might endure even if the buildings do not." Hypatia nodded, carefully rolling up a copy of Archimedes' treatises. "Even if we must teach in small rooms, in secret gatherings, we will do so. I cannot imagine a world where these ideas vanish." He gave her a searching look. "Perhaps, dear child, you are the spark that will guide the next generation with or without the Serapeum." She paused in her work, feeling both the weight of the present danger and a fierce resolve. "I can only do my part," she said, carefully placing the scroll into a wooden container. "I hope it suffices." The rumored edicts soon arrived from Emperor Theodosius. All temples dedicated to the old gods were to be closed. The bishop Theophilus was authorized to enforce these measures. Tensions erupted in the streets, and violent clashes broke out between Christian militants and pagans seeking to defend their sacred spaces. The Serapeum, being one of the grandest pagan sites, was at the heart of this storm. Hypatia, her father, and a handful of others had already managed to spirit away numerous scrolls to safer locales. Nonetheless, the day the Serapeum was officially stormed, word raced through Alexandria's narrow streets as if carried on a scorching wind. The bishop's men, accompanied by eager mobs, broke statues, smashed altars, and scattered any remaining scrolls that had not been hidden. Some contemporary accounts described the destruction with lamentation, likening it to the dying gasp of centuries of tradition. On that grim day, Hypatia stayed indoors, shutters closed, heart pounding every time she heard shouts from the street. She felt as though she were mourning a death in the family, indeed, the death of an institution that had nurtured her mind and spirit. When evening came, Theon entered their home, his face lined with sorrow. "It's done. The Serapeum is in ruins." She swallowed, tears threatening. "All of it?" "All the idols are shattered. Many scrolls too. But we succeeded in saving a large portion by copying them, distributing them. Only time will tell if that's enough." She lowered her head, remembering the hours she had spent in those halls, the dialogues, the quiet alcoves, the statue of Hermes in the courtyard. It felt like a personal wound. "There is no going back," Theon continued quietly. "We must adapt. We must keep teaching, keep preserving. The Serapeum is gone, but the flame of knowledge will burn if we protect it." Hypatia looked up at him, her grief intertwined with a glimmer of determination. "I will keep it alive, father. I swear it." News of the Serapeum's destruction spread across the empire, causing ripples among intellectuals who feared it was a harbinger of a new era, one where Christian dogma would overshadow the liberal pursuits of philosophy. Some scholars fled Alexandria, heading to Athens or other cities that still had relative tolerance for pagan learning. But Hypatia remained, rooted by a deep love for her birthplace and the conviction that not all Christians were enemies of reason. One warm afternoon, a messenger arrived bearing a letter. It was from a young man named Synesius of Cyrene, who had heard of Hypatia's renown as a mathematician and philosopher. In the letter, written in elegant Greek, Synesius praised her accomplishments. "To the most honored philosopher Hypatia, I send greetings. Your name travels far as a beacon of wisdom in these tumultuous times. I wish to learn from you in person, to refine my understanding of the cosmos and the metaphysical truths that guide us. May the fates allow me to study at your side soon." Hypatia read the letter to Theon. He gave a slight smile. "Perhaps this is a sign that not all is lost. People beyond these walls still seek enlightenment. Your reputation grows." She folded the letter carefully. "I shall welcome him if he comes. Let us see if our city can be a place for open inquiry once again." Thus, even as the city reeled from the blow to its heritage, seeds of hope were sown. Hypatia, barely in her 20s, stood at the crossroads. The temple that had sheltered her quest for knowledge lay in ruins, Yet her stature as a teacher rose, drawing students who cared less about the old gods and more about the eternal truths that mathematics and philosophy could reveal. As the last embers of twilight faded one evening, she looked out a small window in her home. Lamps flickered throughout the district, and the night sky overhead shimmered with stars. She remembered her father's words about never fearing to re-examine old truths. She remembered her own vow to keep knowledge alive. "If we cannot have the Serapeum," she whispered to herself, "we will have each other. I will teach, I will discover, and I will protect the flame of learning however I can." The night stretched on, its silence punctuated by the distant sounds of the restless city, still churning with tension and transition. In that hush, Hypatia stood tall, resolved that the path of reason would guide her forward, and she would guide others. So began the next chapter of her life, one in which she would become far more than Theon's daughter. She would become the living emblem of a tradition under threat, holding aloft the lamp of wisdom in a city teetering between brilliance and darkness. Episode 2. The waters of the Alexandrian harbour shone like molten silver under the midday sun. Gulls cried overhead, and ships from distant ports came and went, bearing goods, merchants, and the occasional scholar who wished to visit the legendary city. In the bustling marketplace near the docks, one such visitor, a tall and earnest man in his late 20s, stepped off a vessel. He had a short, neatly trimmed beard and wore a simple but well-made tunic. He carried only a small satchel of personal belongings. Synesius of Cyrene had finally arrived. For weeks he had dreamed of crossing the Mediterranean to study under the famed philosopher Hypatia of Alexandria. Ever since he'd first heard rumors of her brilliance, her mastery of mathematics, her bold insights into philosophy, he felt compelled to seek her guidance. He had corresponded with her briefly, exchanging polite letters. Now, standing amidst the noisy crowd, the salted breeze ruffling his hair, he felt a thrill course through him. He made his way through the winding streets, passing Christian churches with tall crosses, old pagan shrines now shuttered and marked with graffiti, and bustling forums where people argued politics. Eventually, he reached a modest lecture hall near the heart of the city, not far from where the museum and library complex once stood in grander times. Entering cautiously, he found a spacious room with marble floors, rows of benches, and a single dais. At the center stood a woman addressing a small group of students. Her voice carried with it a clarity and authority that instantly commanded respect. Synesius observed from the back, noticing how her hair was neatly bound, her posture poised, and her gestures measured. She was in the midst of explaining a point about the geometry of conic sections. Now, the parabola can be understood as the intersection of a cone with a plane parallel to one of its sides, she said, sketching a figure on a wooden board. But beyond geometry, it can also serve as an analogy in philosophy. Sometimes we are confronted with intersections of the finite and infinite in our own contemplations. She paused, sensing a new presence. Turning toward the door, she looked directly at Synesius. There was a moment of silence, as if she were assessing him. Then, with a hint of a smile, she addressed him. "Welcome. You must be Synesius of Cyrene." He took a deep breath and stepped forward, bowing respectfully. "I am honored to stand before the renowned Hypatia of Alexandria." Her students shifted, eyes flicking with curiosity. Hypatia beckoned Synesius to come closer. "Please, be seated. We were just discussing the geometry of conic sections and its philosophical implications." Synesius took a seat among the others. His heart pounded, not with fear but with anticipation. He was finally here, in the orbit of a woman whose intellect shone like a sun. Over the next hour, he listened intently, enthralled by how Hypatia connected seemingly abstract mathematical theorems to broader questions about reality, the soul, and the nature of the divine. When the session ended, Hypatia approached him, offering her hand in greeting. He clasped it gently, bowing his head in respect. "You have traveled far," she said. "I hope the journey was peaceful." "It was smooth enough," he replied. Your city is vibrant, though I sense undercurrents of tension. Her eyes flickered with a hint of sorrow. Yes, Alexandria is never wholly at peace. But come, let us not dwell on that just yet. You look weary. Would you join me for some refreshment? We can talk more privately. Synesius nodded gratefully. I would be delighted. So they walked through a narrow corridor into a small courtyard where a servant had laid out wine, water, and bread with olive oil. The courtyard was open to the sky, allowing sunlight to spill onto lush potted plants. Seated on a stone bench, Hypatia poured a cup of water for Synesius and offered him bread. So tell me, what do you seek to learn? He paused, thoughtful. I have studied theology and rhetoric, but I find myself drawn to mathematics and philosophy. In my homeland, many are devout Christians, but also revere Greek learning. I want to reconcile these strands, to understand how to be a man of faith without shunning reason. Hypatia nodded slowly. You believe the two can be harmonized? I do. I believe that if God created the cosmos, then the rational laws that govern it are also divine. Ignoring them would be akin to ignoring a facet of God's work. She offered a small smile, as if pleasantly surprised. Then we share common ground. I myself do not consider faith and reason to be natural enemies. I only oppose dogmatism, which rejects questioning and evidence. If your faith encourages the pursuit of truth, we can have fruitful dialogues. Synesius's shoulders relaxed. I feared you might see me as just another Christian intruder upon the old ways. She shrugged gently. I have known Christian friends who love knowledge as deeply as any philosopher. Not all carry the banner of destruction. We will learn from one another. Over the ensuing weeks, Synesius became a close student of Hypatia, attending her lectures, engaging in spirited debates, and observing how she guided her pupils not just in the technical aspects of mathematics, but in cultivating a rigorous philosophical mindset. She taught him that to truly see an object or concept, one must strip away assumptions and approach it in its naked essence. One afternoon, they stood in a small library adjacent to her lecture hall. Hypatia pointed to a scroll that contained part of Euclid's Elements. Euclid began his Elements with definitions, postulates, and axioms. Such a structure might feel tedious, but it establishes a firm foundation. In philosophy, we do the same. Define our terms, clarify our assumptions, and proceed logically. Without it, we drift in illusions. Synesius nodded, his brow knitted in concentration. In theology, too, we rely on definitions of God, of creation, of redemption. If those definitions are unclear, misunderstandings arise. She tapped the scroll lightly, meeting his gaze. Exactly. That is why knowledge, at its best, transcends the boundaries of any single discipline or faith. He studied her face, seeing the passion that burned in her eyes. In that moment, he understood why her students revered her. She was not merely repeating old doctrines. She was a conduit for living wisdom, forging a path forward in an era of uncertainty. Meanwhile, the city's political climate grew more complicated. Orestes, the Roman prefect of Alexandria, was a recent appointment. He strove to maintain order in a city where Christian factions, pagan remnants, and a sizable Jewish community all jostled for influence. Hypatia, because of her reputation for impartial counsel and philosophical perspective, found herself occasionally summoned to share her thoughts with local officials. At first, her father, Theon, was concerned. Take care, daughter, he warned one morning over breakfast. Politics is a serpent's den. It is easy to make enemies from all sides if you speak the truth too plainly. Hypatia gave him a gentle, confident smile. I will be cautious, father, but I believe I can counsel moderation and reason. If I can help quell violence, I will try. He sighed, nodding. Just do not let them ensnare you in petty conflicts. You are a scholar, not a politician. Despite his caution, Hypatia accepted the invitation to meet with Orestes. In a modest official chamber not far from the prefect's residence, she found a tall, stern-looking man in Roman garb, flanked by a few attendants. Orestes regarded her with polite curiosity. "Honored philosopher," he said, gesturing for her to sit, "I have heard of your wisdom and your teachings. Alexandria has become an unstable place, and I seek voices who can help me navigate these waters." She folded her hands calmly. "I am willing to offer counsel, though I am not a politician. What would you have me speak on?" Orestes dismissed his attendants with a wave. Once alone with her, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. Patriarch Theophilus was a formidable presence, but now we have Cyril, his nephew, who is even more ambitious. He wields influence over a militant group within the church, zealots who intimidate those they consider heretics. The Jewish community fears reprisals. Pagans are few but feel threatened, and I must maintain Rome's interests, which demand stability. How do I ensure peace in this swirl of tension? Hypatia drew a measured breath. Those who cling to extremes want total victory over perceived enemies. Peace often demands compromise, or at least respect for differences. Perhaps you can encourage dialogues between community leaders, Christian bishops, Jewish elders, and those few pagan representatives who remain. He rubbed his chin. Dialogue. An admirable idea in theory, but in practice the bishop's men are quick to brand dissent as blasphemy. I fear bridging these divides might be beyond me. Her tone was gentle but firm. A single conversation might not suffice, but repeated efforts can. You have the authority to protect minorities in principle. If you encourage open discourse, you may bring moderate voices to the fore. Once zealots see that their excesses will not be tolerated, they may relent or at least limit themselves. Orestes studied her face. You speak as if you believe in the better angels of human nature. You might be disappointed. Hypatia offered a small smile. Perhaps, but reason and persuasion must be tried before force. Otherwise, we degrade into endless strife. He finally returned her smile, albeit a bit wearily. Let us hope your wisdom finds ears willing to hear it. Synesius, too, sensed the precarious balance in Alexandria. He witnessed the fervor of some Christian preachers who denounced pagan philosophy. Still, he found refuge in Hypatia's circle of students, which included people of varied backgrounds. A small group of them, pagan, Christian, and uncertain, gathered regularly in Hypatia's lecture hall to discuss texts on geometry, astronomy, and Platonic thought. One evening, after a lengthy discussion, the students lingered to chat. A Christian named Philon stood up. "Does it not bother you," he asked, addressing the group, "that some of us follow Christ while others cling to Greek gods?" An older student, an avowed pagan, frowned. "Can we not discuss geometry without bringing deities into it?" Synesius raised a hand, intervening. "I am Christian, but I see no conflict in studying Plato or respecting the mysteries that the pagans hold dear. Faith can be enriched by reason." Philon, still uneasy, turned to Hypatia. "What do you believe, teacher? Do you worship the old gods, or do you deny them altogether, or—" All eyes fixed on her. She took a moment to reply. "I believe in the divine as the ultimate source of truth and goodness. Whether that divine is called the One, or God, or some other name, I approach it through reason and virtue. I pray to the truth itself." The tension in the air softened slightly at her poised answer. She continued, "We can find common ground in the pursuit of knowledge and moral excellence. Names and rites may differ, but the light of wisdom can guide us all." Philon lowered his gaze. I suppose that is something all good hearts can agree on." In the months that followed, the city witnessed sporadic clashes. Christians who attacked Jewish neighborhoods, Jews who retaliated, pagans who hid their rituals for fear of reprisal. Orestes, desperate for a semblance of peace, sought to hold more dialogues. Hypatia, recognized for her impartial counsel, found her voice increasingly valued by Orestes, but that same voice began to draw the suspicion of those who saw her as a pagan influence. Cyril, the new patriarch of Alexandria, was a shrewd and resolute leader. He had gained the bishop's seat upon Theophilus's death and wasted little time consolidating power. Although not all Christians approved of his methods, many admired his unwavering commitment to what he perceived as the true faith. He viewed the old pagan traditions as dangerous relics that undermined the moral fabric of society. Rumors circulated that Cyril's men kept watch on certain scholars, especially those who taught doctrines that sounded too sympathetic to pagan philosophy. Hypatia, though widely respected, was whispered about in darker corners. "She keeps the old ways alive," some said. "She bewitches men with her knowledge," others claimed. One afternoon, as Hypatia returned from a lecture, a small group of men wearing coarse robes approached her on a narrow street. Their leader, a gaunt man with sunken eyes, spoke harshly. "You parade your learning like a pagan idol, leading good Christians astray with your false wisdom." She paused, meeting his gaze steadily. "I teach geometry, astronomy, and philosophy. Why would you call that false wisdom?" "Because it does not acknowledge the true source of knowledge, Christ," the man spat. "You defy the church." Hypatia stood firm, her voice calm. "I defy no one. I merely teach those who wish to learn." One of the men lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "We know who you are. You speak softly, but your teachings erode faith. Repent, turn to the holy truth, or be damned." She winced, trying to free herself. A passerby shouted for them to stop. The men released her, though not gently. The leader hissed, "Heed my warning. This city is Christian, and we will not allow pagan witchcraft to thrive." They stalked away. Hypatia stood there, her heart hammering. A small crowd had gathered, and a woman stepped forward. "Are you hurt, Lady Hypatia?" She shook her head, forced a small smile. "No, not badly. Thank you for your concern." Yet the encounter left her shaken. Such open hostility was not a good omen. That night, over a simple meal of bread and vegetables, Hypatia told her father of the incident. Theon, by now elderly and frail, listened with a mix of anger and concern. "My child, these times are darker than we imagined. Perhaps you should consider traveling to Athens or another city where your work might be safer." She took his hand gently. "Father, this is my home. If I leave, what hope remains for reason here? Besides, many students still rely on me." He closed his eyes, nodding slowly. "I understand. Be cautious. Remember, you cannot reason with a mob inflamed by fanaticism." Despite the growing tensions, her school thrived. People from all corners of the city came to hear her lectures. Some joined out of genuine intellectual interest, others merely out of curiosity. She was, after all, a woman with an extraordinary reputation. In a society where women were often expected to be silent or relegated to domestic roles, Hypatia's very prominence made her an object of fascination and, for some, resentment. Synesius wrote letters to friends abroad, extolling her genius. "She is a marvel, the very embodiment of wisdom. Her discourse is luminous, unraveling the riddles of geometry and the mysteries of the soul alike. I owe my insights to her patient guidance." He also confided in her his growing ambitions to one day hold a position of leadership in the church, hoping to bridge Greek philosophical thought and Christian theology. She encouraged him, yet cautioned him to remain steadfast in his integrity. One evening, after a private discussion on celestial motions, Synesius said, "Teacher, might we speak of the soul? In Christian doctrine, the soul's salvation depends on faith in Christ. In Plato's framework, salvation is the return of the soul to the realm of forms. How do I reconcile these?" Hypatia led him into her study, a room lined with scrolls and illuminated by a single oil lamp. She motioned for him to sit. "If the forms are manifestations of divine truth, could they not be aspects of the same reality you call God? Different traditions use different symbols to describe the highest good." Synesius considered her words. So the Christian notion of salvation might be akin to the soul's ascent to the divine realm, much as Plato described. Precisely. The differences lie in language and ritual, but the core might be the same. purification of the self, alignment with the highest principle, love of wisdom and virtue. If you use reason to explore the depths of your faith, you may find harmony rather than discord." He nodded, feeling a rush of clarity. "Teacher, your words are a balm." "Thank you." She smiled, a gentle warmth in her eyes. "Remember, knowledge without virtue can be destructive. Always let your heart guide your intellect." Away from the quiet sanctum of her study, however, Alexandria's political situation roiled. Cyril's factions clashed with Jewish communities in brutal skirmishes, culminating in the expulsion of a number of Jewish residents from the city. Orestes publicly condemned these acts, which widened the rift between him and the patriarch. Hypatia, through her connections with Orestes, urged dialogue. She continued to meet with city leaders, sometimes in small gatherings that included moderate Christians, prominent Jews, and pagan intellectuals. But her very involvement drew suspicion from Cyril's supporters, who saw Orestes as too lenient and Hypatia as the hidden puppet master behind him. One day, a rumor circulated that Hypatia was advising Orestes to reject any reconciliation with Cyril. It was whispered that she was dabbling in magic to cloud the prefect's mind. Of course, none of it was true, but rumors have a deadly potency in a tense city. Synesius arrived at her door in distress, clutching a parchment. "Teacher, see what is being said." He handed it to her, and she scanned the scribbled lines. They accused her of practicing sorcery, of leading astray the men of Alexandria, of being a symbol of pagan darkness. Hypatia sighed, folding the parchment. "This is slander. We know that. But fear often stokes illogical accusations." Synesius's voice wavered. "I am a Christian, but I know you are innocent. If this continues, your life could be in danger." She lifted her chin bravely. "I will not hide my teachings, nor flee because of rumors. However, we must be prudent. I trust Orestes will not let the mob harm me." As the city lurched from one crisis to another, Hypatia remained a pillar of stability for her students. She continued her lectures on mathematics, working on her commentaries on Diophantus's Arithmetica and Ptolemy's astronomical works. She was said to have refined astronomical tables, making calculations more accurate. In these scholastic pursuits, she found solace from the turbulence outside. One afternoon, in a bright and airy classroom, she spoke to her pupils about the notion of proofs in mathematics. "A proof in geometry or algebra binds us to a sequence of logical steps from premise to conclusion. It demonstrates that certain truths are not up for debate. They are anchored in reason. This is why, even in a world of changing politics and fleeting dogmas, mathematics stands apart. It transcends ephemeral concerns. This is the refuge of the rational mind." Her students listened with rapt attention, many nodding in agreement. Even a few who were devoutly Christian or otherwise took heart in the universal language of mathematics, a realm untouched by the city's factional violence. Yet the violence did not abate. Cyril's supporters, known for their fervor, began to exercise a sort of vigilante power, intimidating those who did not align with their version of Christianity. Orestes, a legal authority, attempted to rein them in, but found himself outmaneuvered by the bishop's formidable influence over the populace. In a bid to quell the unrest, Orestes organized a public forum in the central agora. He invited representatives of different communities to speak. Hypatia attended, standing in the crowd. She watched as Christian leaders and Jewish representatives tried to air their grievances. Then a group of Cyril's partisans began shouting over them. Insults flew, fists were raised, a brawl erupted, leaving several injured and the gathering in chaos. Orestes, seeking to restore calm, publicly condemned the fanatics. But as Hypatia looked on, she sensed that reason was losing its hold on the city's heart. More and more, she felt the weight of an impending crisis, one that might not be averted by words alone. That night, she met Synesius in private. He came to her study, pacing nervously. "Teacher, I fear for your safety. The bishop's men hold you responsible for influencing Orestes. They speak of you as a sorceress." She looked at him sadly. "If I disappear, what lesson would that teach? That reason must cower before fanaticism." He bowed his head, torn by his loyalty to the church and his devotion to his mentor. "In my prayers, I ask for guidance. I do not doubt that God favors wisdom, but men are men, teacher, and they may not heed divine truth." She reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Synesius, your faith can be a bridge. Stay true to what you know is right. If anything happens, promise me you will continue teaching. The flame of knowledge cannot die." His eyes brimmed with emotion. "I promise, teacher. But do not speak as if you will soon depart this world. You must remain among us." She gave him a tired smile. "We must prepare for all possibilities while we hope for peace." By the time she was in her mid-40s, Hypatia had become a figure of legend, a woman leading a scholarly circle in Alexandria, beloved by students, respected by the prefect, but increasingly reviled by certain Christian hardliners who saw her as a stubborn vestige of pagan intellectualism. She herself worshipped no pagan gods in a traditional sense, yet the stigma of pagan identity clung to her due to her lineage and her philosophical background. Secretly, some of her supporters urged her to leave the city, at least for a while, or to compromise by publicly declaring herself a Christian. But Hypatia refused. She would neither lie about her beliefs nor forsake the city she so deeply loved. When she wrote letters to correspondents abroad, occasionally to scholars in Athens, she lamented the decline of tolerance in Alexandria. Yet she remained hopeful that the cycles of fanaticism would pass, as they sometimes did, giving way to a more enlightened era. One late afternoon, she rode through the city streets in a small carriage. Dressed in her customary scholar's robes, she gazed at the passing sights: children playing in dusty alleys, women carrying water jugs, merchants selling fragrant spices. She loved these streets and the people in them, no matter their creed. Yet the crowd seemed subdued, overshadowed by tensions that refused to vanish. In that pensive mood, she closed her eyes and thought of the geometry that had once enchanted her as a child, the circle she had drawn under her father's guidance. A perfect form, unbroken. She yearned for that unity in human affairs, a wholeness that transcended divisions. The carriage bumped along, heading toward her home, and she prayed, whether to the one, to the eternal forms, or to the universal truth, that reason would yet prevail over the storm gathering on Alexandria's horizon. Thus ended another phase in her life, the apex of her teachings, the respect of students near and far, and the uneasy tension that hung in the air. As each day passed, the city grew ever more polarized, and Hypatia stood at the heart of the whirlpool, embodying reason, scholarship, and a deep faith in human potential, yet threatened by forces that saw her as a dangerous emblem of the old world. Episode 3. The city of Alexandria simmered in the early spring heat, a tension as palpable as the hazy dust that hung over its streets. Over the past few months, relations between the Roman prefect Orestes and the patriarch Cyril had deteriorated further. Sporadic violence erupted in neighborhoods, and rumors flew faster than the sea breeze. Whispers condemned Hypatia for bewitching Orestes and turning him against the church. With each passing day, these whispers grew darker and more insistent. Hypatia continued her routine with composed dignity. She taught her classes, advised her students, and worked on mathematical commentaries. Yet she felt a looming dread, an awareness that the city's powder keg of hostility could ignite in an instant. One overcast afternoon, as she dismissed a lecture on the metaphysics of Plotinus, a group of older students lingered behind. Their faces were grave. "Teacher," one of them began quietly, "we have heard talk in the markets that the bishop's supporters accuse you of hindering any reconciliation between Orestes and Cyril." A second student added, "They say you practice astrology and black magic. People chant in the streets, 'Hypatia, the witch, Hypatia, the devil's mistress.'" She frowned, exhaustion washing over her. Superstition and fear are powerful forces. I have no illusions about them, but I cannot stop teaching truth because of slander. But your safety, another insisted. She raised a hand gently. I understand, but I will not renounce my vocation. Knowledge must endure, or we truly descend into darkness. The students exchanged worried glances. They bowed and left, each with a knot of apprehension in their hearts. That evening, a timid knock sounded at Hypatia's door. She opened it to find a young man, a messenger from Orestes. He presented a sealed parchment. Lady Hypatia, the prefect requests your presence for a consultation tomorrow morning. She broke the seal and read. Orestes wished to discuss the city's precarious situation and desired her insight. She sighed, recalling her father's caution about politics. Nonetheless, Orestes was the city's authority, and she still believed in reasoned dialogue. She agreed to come. When the messenger had gone, she sat alone in her study, the oil lamp flickering. She glanced at her father's old desk, still strewn with scrolls he had once consulted. Though Theon had passed away some years before, his spirit felt present in those texts and in the warm glow of the lamp. She recalled how he had warned her to avoid political quagmires. I have tried, father, she whispered to the empty room, but the times have pulled me in, whether I wish it or not. Morning found her riding in a simple carriage to the prefect's headquarters. The sun beat down harshly. The streets seemed tense, quieter than usual. She glimpsed groups of people huddled at corners, whispering or pointing in her direction. She tried to ignore their stares. Orestes greeted her in a cramped office, flanked by a pair of tired-looking aides. He dismissed them after formalities, then turned to her with a troubled expression. You know why I've called you here, he said, weary lines etched on his face. Cyril's men grow bolder. They spread vile rumors, using your name as a symbol of pagan resistance. She nodded. I have heard. It troubles me deeply. He gestured in frustration. They are pressuring me to sever all ties with you, claiming you bewitch me with your intellect. They demand that I publicly rebuke you. A slight anger flared in her eyes. That is absurd. You know I have done nothing of the sort. Orestes rested a hand on his forehead. Of course I know, but I am in a precarious position. Rome expects me to maintain order. The church wields immense influence. Part of me thought that perhaps, maybe if you kept a lower profile. Hypatia's jaw tightened. I refuse to lie or hide. Is that what they want? For me to pretend I am ignorant, or to convert publicly when I do not believe in their doctrines? He exhaled. They want submission, whether sincere or not. They hate that you are a woman of high standing outside their control. They blame you for everything that stands between me and Cyril. She stared at him, searching his eyes. What do you suggest I do? Orestes hesitated, pain evident in his voice. I beg you to be cautious. I cannot command you to flee Alexandria, but I fear for your safety. If you remain, keep your public appearances to a minimum until tempers cool. Her tone grew soft. I cannot abandon my students. They look to me for guidance. He extended his hands, as if beseeching her to understand. I know. I admire your resolve. But the mob is unpredictable. You have seen how they act when inflamed by the bishop's rhetoric. After a pause, she asked, What do you plan to do about these accusations? Continue to deny them, he replied. I stand by you, but my voice alone may not suffice against a horde whipped into frenzy. I will try to find a diplomatic path with Cyril. Hypatia nodded. Thank you. I only hope reason prevails. He gave her a sad smile. So do I. She left Orestes' quarters with a heavy heart. Outside, the sun glared and the air felt stifling. Her carriage was waiting to take her back. As she boarded, she glimpsed a few figures watching from across the street, men in coarse robes leaning against a crumbling wall. Their gazes were hostile. That night, she slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares of rampaging crowds and fires devouring scrolls and books. A week passed with no immediate calamity, but the tension did not dissipate. At times it seemed as if the city held its breath, waiting for a spark. Then, on a cool afternoon, that spark was lit. The details would later be recounted differently by various observers, but the gist was this. A rumor spread that Hypatia was on her way to meet Orestes again, presumably to conspire against the church. A group of Cyril's most zealous followers, known as the Parabolani, men who often acted as a sort of clerical militia, caught wind of her route. They gathered in the winding streets near the Caesareum, once a temple, but now rededicated as a Christian church, waiting to intercept her. Synesius, who had heard ominous chatter, rushed to warn her. He found her at her lecture hall, where she was concluding a lesson on the geometry of circles. Panting, he burst into the room. "Teacher, you must not travel today. A mob is forming." She looked up, alarmed by his urgency. "Where?" "In the streets near the harbor. They speak of confronting you. They claim you are a sorceress standing in the way of Christian unity. Please, stay here or go into hiding." The students gasped, fear creeping into their faces. Hypatia's eyes blazed with resolve. "I cannot hide forever, Synesius. If they seek me, let me speak to them, reason with them." He shook his head vehemently. "You cannot reason with a mob stirred by hatred. This is madness." She inhaled, trying to steady herself. "I am not meeting Orestes today. My errands are only to visit a friend, but if the streets are blocked, I will take another route." "Teacher," one of her older students said softly, "please reconsider. This is not a mere protest. They are armed and shouting for blood." Hypatia paused, torn. Finally, she relented to the concern in their eyes. "Very well. I will wait until tomorrow. Maybe by then the mob will disperse." But fate had other plans. Morning came and the city seemed calm. Hypatia decided to venture out, believing the danger had passed. She took her small carriage, driven by an old family servant, and made her way toward the district where her friend lived. The sun was not yet high, and a gentle breeze offered some relief from the heat. She told herself it would be a normal day. Yet as the carriage turned onto a quieter street, she glimpsed a throng of men gathered ahead. A sinking feeling gripped her stomach. She recognized the coarse robes of the Parabolani. Their faces, once they saw her, contorted with rage. "Hypatia the sorceress!" one of them yelled, pointing. Another shouted, "She conspires against the bishop. Seize her." Panic seized her heart. She told the driver to turn around, but before the carriage could pivot, the mob rushed forward, blocking the path. Hands grabbed the horse's reins, others yanked the carriage door open. Hypatia tried to speak, tried to say something that would calm them, but they grabbed her arms, pulled her violently to the ground. She stumbled, her knees scraping against the rough cobblestones. "Witch! Pagan!" They hurled insults, spittle flying. The swirl of faces and shouted accusations formed a vortex of hatred. She saw clubs, stones, fists. She cried out, "Stop! You are mistaken. I am no enemy." But her words were swallowed by the crowd's fury. Amid the chaos, someone struck her on the face, and her vision blurred. They dragged her through the streets. Some accounts say they brought her into a church or a building near the Caesareum, though details vary. Regardless, she found herself forced inside a structure. The floors were cold and unyielding. In the haze of pain and terror, she saw men brandishing tiles or shards of pottery. They tore at her clothes. She tried to speak, to protest, to beg for reason, but the howls of the mob drowned her out. Blow after blow rained down. White-hot pain coursed through her. She thought of her father, of Synesius, of her students. She thought of the geometry of circles, the arcs of the heavens. She tried to cling to the notion that rational truth might prevail, but the crowd's fanaticism was impenetrable. Her mind drifted in and out of darkness as her body succumbed. In those final moments, she might have whispered a prayer to the One, or simply to the truth she had cherished. Her life's work, her brilliant intellect, her devotion to knowledge, none could shield her from this barbaric violence. They ended her life cruelly, leaving her broken body in the aftermath of their frenzy. Some later said they burned what remained, as if to erase every trace of her existence. In that brutal moment, Alexandria lost one of its brightest lights, a philosopher who had stood for reason, tolerance, and the pursuit of higher understanding. Word of Hypatia's murder spread like wildfire. Students who arrived at her lecture hall found it shuttered, the teacher gone. Synesius, upon hearing the news, sank into despair and rage. He penned a lament, cursing the madness that had overtaken men who claimed to serve God. Orestes, for his part, was aghast, though politically impotent to mete out justice. Some sources claim that Cyril quietly endorsed or at least did not punish the perpetrators, arguing that Hypatia had indeed been an obstacle to Christian unity. Others insisted Cyril was not directly involved, that he was merely complicit by his silence. The truth would be debated for centuries. All that was certain was that Hypatia had become the most infamous casualty of the city's spiraling religious strife. Her murder became a symbol. Some saw in it the triumph of Christian zeal over pagan thought, while others saw the darkest side of fanaticism, the moment when reason was sacrificed on the altar of intolerance. In the aftermath, those closest to Hypatia tried to preserve her works. Many of her commentaries circulated among scholars who whispered her name with reverence. Synesius left Alexandria, deeply disillusioned, yet more determined than ever to fuse Christian belief with philosophical rigor. In letters, he wrote, "I cannot forget my teacher, whose light was snuffed out by ignorance. Let us endeavor to ensure that her spirit, her devotion to truth, endures despite her violent end." In the years and decades after Hypatia's death, Alexandria continued to evolve, shaped by the tides of religion and empire. Churches multiplied, pagan temples fell into ruin, and the city's once famous intellectual institutions struggled to survive. Yet the memory of Hypatia never truly vanished. She was remembered in the writings of historians like Socrates Scholasticus, who recorded that she was exceedingly learned in every branch of philosophy, and lamented her fate as a stain on the city's Christian community. Her legend grew, in part, as a cautionary tale. A woman of reason destroyed by the intolerance of her time, a last vestige of the great classical age extinguished by the new order. Yet, to those who read her works, her mathematical commentaries, her philosophical letters, she remained a guiding star, a reminder that truth is not bound by sect or creed. Long after her death, a young student in Athens or Constantinople might unroll a copy of her commentary on conic sections or her refinements to Ptolemy's astronomy. In the margins, they might find a handwritten note, "Herein lies the wisdom of Hypatia of Alexandria, slain by ignorance." And that student, peering into the carefully reasoned lines of geometry, might glimpse the spirit of a remarkable scholar who believed in the power of the human mind to fathom the cosmos. Thus Hypatia's influence persisted. Her name became a beacon invoking both admiration and sorrow. Admirers would recall her devotion to knowledge, her championing of dialogue over dogma, and her refusal to cower before threats. Skeptics might dismiss her story as a relic of an older age or spin it to suit their ideological ends. Yet none could deny that she had stood at the crossroads of history, where classical learning met a rising tide of Christian authority and paid the ultimate price. Her students, scattered and dismayed, carried forward her teaching in secret gatherings and distant cities, ensuring that the flame of Greek mathematics and philosophy did not perish. Over time, the world changed again. New centers of learning arose, some inspired by the very traditions she had nurtured. Her story was repeated in hushed tones, passed on from teacher to pupil as a bittersweet testament to what Alexandria once was and what it might yet be if reason and faith could find harmony. In the end, Hypatia's life was a testament to the resilience of inquiry and the fragility of civilized discourse. Born into a family steeped in scholarly pursuits, she absorbed the wisdom of antiquity, refined it, and shared it with all who sought her out, be they pagan or Christian, man or woman, stranger or friend. She believed in a cosmos ordered by rational laws and in a humanity capable of grasping those laws through study and reflection. The tragedy of her death lay not simply in the loss of one brilliant mind, but in the symbol it became, a reminder that even in the cradle of knowledge, fear and fanaticism can erupt, devouring what is best in us. Yet from that tragedy, countless future generations found the will to fight ignorance and oppression. They invoked her name as they strove to keep learning alive in dark times, to champion reason against unthinking zeal, to insist that the pursuit of truth is not the domain of one creed, but the shared aspiration of all humankind. Thus did the story of Hypatia of Alexandria, in all its drama, sorrow, and enduring legacy, echo through the centuries, a soaring testament to the heights the human mind can attain, and a dire warning of how low it can descend when guided by hatred rather than understanding.